Hey everybody, my name is Mike. I have ALS, and I want to talk to you today just briefly about a drug for ALS being offered in every neurologist's office across the land, and that is Radicava by Mitsubishi Pharma. I apologize, it's such a beautiful day today, and I've got my neighbor's dog outside here, little poodle barking like crazy, so I apologize for the inconvenience, but if I waited to do this video, it would probably be weeks to get this lucky again. So without the dog being outside, and it's absolutely beautiful out here. So I want to go ahead and proceed with this because it's also important. I want to let you know that there's a lot of debate about this drug, as you may already know. You've been asking friends and family and your doctor, should I go ahead and get on this treatment? Well, first of all, let me start by saying I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a doctor of any kind. I'm just an average patient with all of the research materials that are out there. The goal for me today is to try to help you make a decision. Do you want to try this drug or do you not? So again, I want you to just take this with a grain of salt. It's strictly for your informational purposes. As we go on, I'm also going to talk about why this matters. Why does it matter whether or not Radicava, quote, works or doesn't work? And the fact is that there are new drugs coming online right now that people have been fighting to try to gain access to that are not approved while Radicava does remain approved. So I want to just say for 1 second that before we start, it matters that Radicava is approved while other therapies are not. And I think it'll become evident to you as we go on why this is the case. First, let's talk a little bit about the history of Radicava. And this is it right here. I want to show you just for 1 second what the drug actually looks like. It comes in IV bags like this. And you get 2 of those per treatment per day. And then your treatment cycle is comprised of 14 days on, and then a waiting period, and then 10 days on, and then that cycle repeats each month indefinitely for life. That Radicava is suspected to work for ALS by being a free radical scavenger. It was originally a stroke drug that was used and designed by Mitsubishi Pharma in Japan. This is a Japanese drug for all intents and purposes. It was approved by the FDA without a single U.S. trial. A very small number of patients in the trial that was ultimately used to gain approval. I'm going to show you documentation as we go through this. It's like a slideshow. I mean, there's no question about this data. Much of it came from Mitsubishi. I've got to be very careful with what I say here, and I will be, but I'm going to give you the true story. I'm going to give you, the angle that you're not getting from the doctor, basically. And hopefully it helps you decide. I'm not suggesting in one way, shape, or form you should either do it or not do it. That decision is up to you. I tried it. I have a port on my chest to prove it. So when I speak of this drug, I speak from experience. Okay, I want to be clear about that. Many people actually have tried the drug and stopped. Quite a few, actually. It's a very expensive drug, costing as much as $144,000 a year. And my personal advice to you is that as long as there is no cost to you, and you are deemed to be a, quote, fast progressor, the drug has a much better chance of working for you than it does somebody who's a very slow progressor. So if you're a fast progressing ALS patient, there is some evidence that bulbar has a better success rate. Then I would suggest that you try it as long as you don't have to pay for it. So you'll go and you'll get a port installed. That makes it much easier. You don't have to get a port installed. In fact, I'm kind of on the fence on this one because I'd rather not have it in my body right now. Nobody else will use this. Once you stop Radicava or you decide to do that, it's very rare that anybody else will access your port. It has to be flushed. It has to be cleaned. And so for me, I would reconsider the port even if I were going to try the drug. I would just make them stab me every day. And I know that sucks, but for me, I would want to try it that way. And I'll tell you why. Part of the Radicava procedure is flushing the port with a chemical called heparin. And a heparin flush is done every single time you get the dose. It flushes the port through. It's an anticoagulant. And I'm not so certain that taking that much heparin during 28 days a month is, well, it's not 28 days a month, I'm sorry. It would be, 14 on and then I think 10 off and then 10 back on. So you're taking a lot of heparin over that 28-day cycle, which repeats. So for me, I'm a little leery about that much heparin going into my body. Now, there's no data to support my theory necessarily, but that's a lot, and they push a full tube in there. So certainly the port makes it easy. It makes it possible for you to do at home. A lot of people go to an infusion center, and that's up to you. But some places, some insurances will not pay for home infusion. So I tried Radicava myself twice. The first time I started it, it seemed okay, very tolerable for the first week, but I noticed that I seemed to be progressing faster. Now this is where it gets a little dicey because only an ALS patient can know, first of all, what progression feels like and how to describe it. It's difficult to relay that to somebody that's healthy. I just had a feeling after the first 2 or 3 months that I was getting worse more quickly than I was. And this is where it becomes tricky. Unless somebody stops progressing completely from a treatment, it really is subjective on that individual person, because while we have a trial here to judge the effectiveness of Radicava, there's no way to know on you as an individual whether or not it's helping or hurting. So I actually stopped, okay? And I noticed slowly after a month or two that I stopped getting worse as quickly, it seemed like. But the problem with ALS is that it can be very difficult to know that. So I actually did another round of Radicava. I started up again. I was off for I think a total of about 3 months. I started up again. And sure enough, after the first month or so, I felt like, wow, I'm getting worse quicker. Again, there's no scientific data behind this. I didn't do an FVC score. I just, we know our bodies. I can tell something was not right. In fact, one of the side effects of this drug, if you look at it, one of the side effects of Radicava is gait disturbance. Well, I mean, the only thing I could think of that would cause gait disturbance is progression. I suppose it could be affecting, since it's a stroke drug, I suppose it could be affecting your motor cortex or something. But I think, frankly, the reason that gait disturbance was listed as a side effect is because it was a side effect, meaning it was progressing faster in some people. And sure enough, if you look on the forums and on all that, on Facebook and that stuff, you can see people, just as many approximately, who say it made them worse as those who say, I think it's working. And so this is why you've got to be careful with this decision. Don't get locked into this mindset that you have to stay on it once you're on it. The sales team seems to be pretty aggressive. So I believe that some insurance companies have now begun questioning the drug on the first application. Some people are telling me that it's a little harder to get. Not really with the VA and the large, insurance companies. Social Security is still paying for it, I believe, but it's mostly been, smaller insurance companies who have said, look, this drug is not affecting the trajectory of the disease. So why are we paying $144,000 a year for this? And it's a good point. So all I know is, from leading my advocacy group, No More Excuses, that people have sent me those messages saying, and you'll see them yourself. You can see them on the forums, saying that I think it's making me a little worse, faster. I'm going to quit, and that they keep calling. So in some cases, the orders have been very aggressively filled, and people have just heard that they owe a balance, or whatever, that they owe this much. Usually, it's your max out of pocket, $6,000 to $8,000. So this is my point here. Is that you have a decision to make. If your insurance does not cover Radicava in full, you're probably going to owe quite a bit of money that first to buy your deductible down or your max out of pocket. And so this is why I would suggest very carefully if you're going to owe any money for this, and what I would recommend that you do, one patient to another, is call your insurance company and record the phone call as long as it's legal in your state, and ask the question, what is my actual out-of-pocket going to be for Radicava coverage this year? And let them answer that question and get it on tape. Okay, a lot of times what they say is not necessarily accurate because it's a complicated question or whatever. What I would hate to see happen is somebody take this drug and they get a bill for $6 or $8 grand a few months later. Okay, to me, this is my personal opinion. Knowing what I know, I would not pay that amount of money for Radicava unless you can afford it and it's not going to impact your overall financial strategy. Okay, don't do it. If it's free, I really don't see the reason not to try it, because you could be lucky and be in one of those small group of people that I'm going to tell you about next who saw, the 33% quoted figure. Sorry about the dog in the background again. It's a little poodle. He's a little mean little guy too. But let's talk now. Let's move into the data portion. Now we've talked about cost and that stuff. Let's move into the data. So Mitsubishi submitted one trial that finally got approval. There were a number of trials for Radicava, and this is one of the stinks that a lot of the media has kind of locked onto, is that the drug actually failed a number of times to meet p-value or to meet probability value. In other words, it really didn't show to be working, frankly. Mitsubishi was finally able to find one small group, again, all Japanese people with ALS, and when I say pals, I mean people with ALS. One small group was able to pass muster. This group of people that Mitsubishi was able to find that passed the trial, passed muster, made p-value, let's say, that the entire approval is based on from the FDA. This group was a very small group of people, made up of about 130 pals, roughly, 130 people with ALS in Japan. Now, these people were only representative of 7% of the total ALS population. 7%. So the term that Mitsubishi uses, or the phrase that's out there, that Radicava slows ALS by 33%, is accurate, but only to the extent if you're one of those 7% of people. So in other words, you have roughly a 7 out of 100 chance of being in that group. And that group of people is generally considered as follows. People who were very healthy still. They had a FVC or breathing score above 80%. And I think in the literature, Mitsubishi even says that they were basically, I won't say normal, but they were still very, very healthy. So the second thing is that they were faster progressors. And the faster progressors were easier to read in this trial, I believe. So faster progressing, newly diagnosed, healthy people with ALS, people who are still in really good shape, showed the best result. However, that group of people only represents roughly 7% of the entire ALS population. So, while it is true that some people saw a 33% reduction on average, is what they claim, you can see here that it only applies to a very small subset of people that have ALS, and this was the problem. Let's take a little closer look at the data now regarding the actual numbers, the results of this one small trial. As you can see here, this very small group of people produced the following results. This is the placebo group. As you can see, the placebo group, look at the number of faster progressors in the placebo group, and then a lot of those people, some of them, have moved out of that and over into the very left column of the treated group, of the people who were actually, quote, responders, people who got a good result. So what happened is some of these faster progressors who were given the drug moved over from the high fast progressing rate down into a smaller rate, either 2% or a -2 drop or a -3 to 10. Now, the way they present the data is a little bit suspicious, because if you'll notice, the breaking point here is 2 points. There's a 2-point drop. And then it goes from 3 to 10. So I think they had to do that to show, and this is only my opinion, but I think they broke the data down this way to allow more people to appear as if they got a substantial reaction. And they really didn't. If you look at the middle group in each placebo and treated group, the middle group, the 3 to 10, there really wasn't a big number change there. It was actually about 7 or 8, I think. So you can see people in the medium progression group really didn't do all that well, and if they did, it didn't really drop their progression score that much. As you can see here, we have a drug in Radicava that the results are very muddy. They're not clear by any means. The risk is, of course, the worst case scenario is that it makes you get worse quicker. That's a terrible scenario. Somebody who's faced with a 2 to 3 year lifespan to start, losing a year or two off of that could be devastating. So it's hard to tell. It's hard to read this data. What I would advise you to do is to try the drug if you can, if it's free, if it doesn't cost you anything, or if you can afford it, go ahead and try it, see what it does. Just be aware that there is a chance that it could increase your progression. I think we've learned at this point now, after a couple of years or 3 years out in the real world, that this drug has that capability to increase progression in some people. It says so right in its literature that it can increase gait disturbance. And so be aware of that. If you feel like you're getting worse quicker, trust your body. You probably are, but there's no guarantee. And that's the problem with Radicava. It's not definitive enough to produce the kind of result that we need in ALS. And I want to roll out of this conversation now. I hope that information was helpful for you as you decide whether or not to try it. But I want to bring in another scenario here, just for reference. Many of our group, No More Excuses, has been fighting like crazy to try to get access to a drug called Neurone. It's a stem cell procedure that's injected into the lumbar spine. And it's had some pretty amazing results. It's currently in phase 3. It's in a 200-person size trial, so bigger than the Radicava trial by about another 25% roughly. And it is in phase 3, but the trial will not end until around October, November of this year, 2020. It's very encouraging, though, what we're seeing so far. I want to give you a side-by-side comparison of how I see the results. Again, this is my opinion. I'm not a doctor. Take this for what you want. But what I will show you is the facts, at least as we know them so far, from the phase 2 results and from anecdotal evidence that we're seeing. And so what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about why a drug like Radicava is approved, while a stem cell therapy like Neurone is not approved. I want to talk about Neurone just briefly and the facts that we do know so far about it after it completed its phase 2 trial. The phase 2 data is in, and it's not available in its complete form, but it is available in a summary, as well as, undoubtedly, the numerous anecdotal evidence videos that you've seen on the internet, many of which I have created by interviewing people who are actually taking this drug or this therapy. I want to be clear that the Brainstorm trial, the phase 3 trial for Neurone, is 200 people. Now, out of that 200 people, 100 will be receiving placebo. Incredibly, placebo at a 50-50 ratio in the worst terminal disease you could possibly ever get. But that's what happened. That's what happened because that's what the FDA deemed necessary to see a result. 50-50. So, out of those 200, 100 will therefore not have a chance. The other 100 will receive the real therapy, and out of that 100, the data suggests that we should see 46 responders. Now, I want to be clear, not all of those 46 who show a response are going to have a miraculous response, but they will show a response. That's what the phase 2 data said. And phase 2 was only a single injection. Phase 3 is actually 3 doses. We do fully expect, a compounding effect to be measurable. In fact, the only person alive today, Matt Molina, has had 6 doses of Neurone and had a really good response after dose 4, 5, and 6. So, like chemotherapy, we do expect to see improved performance after increased dosing. In fact, Matt's statements so far have been unequivocal. He states that he's almost recovered his breathing function to a normal state, although Matt will never be normal. Nobody with ALS ever will. Neurone is not a cure. Nobody has ever said that it is. But I do want to make you aware that the bottom line is that in 2020, we have a drug or a therapy that is not approved, that could be and should be, frankly, based on what we already know. And yet, the march for data continues. This relentless, insatiable desire for data comes at the great expense of human life, like my own. I could be taking this drug right now, and instead of losing more and more of my body every day, we could be, actually, saving lives. However, the FDA continues on this path of needing extra data. It already has data from phase 2 that showed efficacy. The only problem is that the trial was not powered for efficacy. Even though it showed efficacy, it wasn't powered for efficacy. Therefore, the FDA suggested to Brainstorm that it should do a phase 3 trial. So it did. When the FDA says something like that, if you're a drug manufacturer, that's what you do. You don't argue or you don't appeal, you just do it. And so that's what happened. We started on this long phase 3 process, or phase 3 trial that has now culminated in 2020, that will end later this year, and which, sadly, a lot of people in the placebo arm have lost their life, being unable to complete the trips. We also know that, again, only 46% of people in this trial, in the treated group, will show a response. However, as you can see from the Radicava data, which produces a 33% response in 7 out of 100 patients, the Neurone procedure from Brainstorm has no such restriction. It produced a 46% response rate out of that first treated group in the phase 2 trial. However, Neurone has no such restriction. It produced a 46% response rate across all people in the trial, which were not screened the way that the ones in Brainstorm were, to the same extent. There was a breathing exclusion for those in the Brainstorm trial because you had to be able to complete the trial. And honestly, starting at, I think it was 65%, the reason that was in there is because of the placebo effect. They knew that many people would drop out, being unable to complete this trial because they were going to be receiving placebo and used as guinea pigs. And that's exactly what happened. So, we have a drug that works, again, in 7 out of 100 people by about 33% versus a drug that works in 46% of people that has a response. Now, not all 46 of those are going to have a drastic response. Perhaps only 25 of those people will see a really solid response, meaning, wow, I really feel better. And out of that group, a number of people will stop progressing completely. So in reality, what we have is a situation that, let's say if it's even 25% who have that kind of response, which, judging by what we see anecdotally, is highly possible, or more, 25 to 30, let's say, that is absolutely astronomical for this disease. I want to be clear, that kind of result is nothing to be embarrassed about or to write off. That is a stellar result. 30 out of 100 people, the opportunity for 30 out of 100 people in this disease to have a response like that is stellar. And we may see, frankly, that it's even higher as the dosing is increased. We only know what happens after 3 doses, except the one person that got 6, we saw a drastic improvement between 4, 5, and 6. So we do expect increased dosing to produce better results. So I hope this has been helpful for you. Some of this data has been subjective, I will give you that. However, ALS is the type of disease, it's so brutal and so inhumane that we must be willing to take chances if we're not on drugs that are completely safe. I'm not suggesting that we give people battery acid. I'm suggesting that if something is proven safe, and Neurone is safe, that it should be tried after basic efficacy is established. if we see something working, like President Trump said the other night, frankly. He says the FDA told him that a drug would be ready in a year. And he said, a year? He goes, I want it tonight. That is exactly the kind of attitude that ALS has needed for so long. And so I ask all of you to consider these numbers. It is confusing, can be. So I hope these graphs and charts have been helpful for you. But I think what we need to do as patients is to stand up and say, we matter. Those alive with ALS right now matter. So let's put the finishing touches on this right now. The bottom line is that we have, for ALS, a drug approved in Radicava, and frankly Riluzole, which, as you know, extends life by 3 months, apparently. We have these two drugs approved by the FDA, and we have new drugs coming in, which we hope the FDA will work to expedite, but at least to hold them to the same standards as of approval as Radicava. Frankly, knowing the data now, perhaps it's changed your mind a little bit, or helped you make a decision on whether or not to take this drug. I can't offer you any easy answers, and that's what worries me. If it's hard to decide whether or not you should actually take a drug, that's probably a pretty good indicator of the answer. For me, I tried it. I can honestly say I did, and it was not for me. Maybe different for you. I hope, though, that by watching this video and by asking you to come to our website at No More Excuses, you'll see an aggressive attempt to essentially gain access to new treatments which show a better result, frankly. Radicava is not changing the trajectory of ALS as had been hoped. It is also funding quite a few of ALS's fundraisers and pet projects, which also concerns me. Are we using Radicava at this point in the ALS community because it actually helps people with this terrible disease, or are we choosing to use Radicava as a cash flow machine at this point? And there is no easy answer to this. All I can say is that you should try to fight as hard as you can for approval of new drugs, new therapies, because they are close. There are several new therapies which, if approved now and could be taken now, could affect our lives and affect the trajectory of ALS, I believe. We talk a lot about these therapies at No More Excuses, and that's why I would urge that you come join our fight to try to gain access to them. Because of the nature of what we're seeing with COVID and the way that the FDA is essentially throwing caution to the wind, I say caution to the wind, we've seen remarkable statements from both Stephen Hahn, Alex Azar, and President Trump. These statements are interesting considering that the FDA has typically been very staunch in its approval methods. For the director or commissioner of the FDA to make the statement that sometimes science or technology happens quicker, essentially, than the approval pathways is incredible. This is the exact argument that we have been making in our group over the last 6 months to a year to expedite the approval of Neurone. And unfortunately, these requests have fallen on deaf ears. I find it disappointing, frankly, in our American way of life and in our society that only until a disease or a virus that is contagious and which could kill or affect the families of those in power that make these decisions do they finally grasp what it feels like to have a disease, to see treatments out there that could affect your life and help your life, but not be able to get to them because of a safety argument. I want to be clear, the drugs that we advocate for are all proven safe. Neurone has passed every single benchmark thrown at it now in its 10-year-long pursuit of approval from the FDA. 10 years. I hesitate to think how many people might have had a chance to take this drug and to live a longer life if this drug had been granted approval after phase 2. Nevertheless, here we are in 2020 with two options for ALS, neither of which has affected the trajectory of this disease, while some that could sit on a shelf somewhere. And that's the situation we're in. I've shown today, I hope, to you that there is a better way, that we should fight aggressively for our lives and to have treatments that could help us. We can only hope that the FDA recognizes the importance of those with ALS. So far, tragically, it has not done that at any point in history. So what I would like to say now is to you, fight hard, keep fighting, don't give up, and I hope this information has been helpful for you as you go through this journey. Please come join us at No More Excuses, where we have many more similar videos like this on our YouTube channel called ALS News Now. If you have any questions or want to reach out, please do, and I'll try to get back with you as soon as possible. Hope this has been helpful for you, and we'll see you later. Thank you.